Most people come to New York and see the same 10 things. Times Square, the High Line, Central Park. And those places are great. They're great for a reason. But New York has a secret. It rewards the people who look a little harder. And today, I want to show you 10 places that most tourists walk right past. Some of them are completely free. Some of them are hiding in plain sight. And every single one of them is extraordinary. These are my 10 underrated places in New York. And I want to bet that at least 3 of them are going to surprise you. Here's a question. What if I told you that for the exact same price as a subway ride, you could fly over the East River, 250 feet above Manhattan, with a view that would cost you hundreds of dollars at a rooftop bar? That's the Roosevelt Island Tramway. And for some reason, most tourists completely ignore it. This cable car opened in 1976. And here's the wild part. It was only supposed to be temporary. The city needed a way to connect Roosevelt Island while they finished building the subway extension. So they built this aerial tramway as a stopgap, figured they'd tear it down in a few years. But when the subway finally opened in 1989, 13 years later, New Yorkers had fallen in love with the tram, and nobody had the heart to shut it down. Today, it carries nearly 3 million passengers a year, making it the busiest aerial tramway on the entire planet. The 4-minute journey takes you 250 feet above the East River, gliding parallel to the Queensboro Bridge, with Midtown Manhattan on one side and the quiet green shores of Roosevelt Island below you. The Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, all of it at eye level for a $2.90 MetroCard swipe. It's been used as a film set for Spider-Man and Leon, the Professional. It survived Hurricane Sandy when every other form of public transport had shut down. One attendant has been working on this tram for nearly 50 years. He says he never gets tired of the view. Once you get to the island, walk south to the Four Freedoms Park, a stunning FDR memorial with direct views of the United Nations headquarters across the water. Quiet, uncrowded, genuinely beautiful. Imagine walking into the private library of one of the most powerful men in American history. A room designed to intimidate foreign heads of state. A room where the shelves hold 3 Gutenberg Bibles, handwritten manuscripts by Mozart and Dickens, love letters from Napoleon, and the diary of Queen Victoria. That room exists, and almost nobody in New York visits it. J.P. Morgan was the most powerful banker in American history. The man who personally bailed out the U.S. government during the financial panic of 1907. He was also an obsessive collector of rare manuscripts, books, and art. Between 1902 and 1906, he built a private library next to his Manhattan townhouse, an Italian Renaissance palazzo on 36th Street, to house his collection. It was designed as something more than storage. It was a statement. When Morgan met with foreign dignitaries here, the sheer volume of human civilization packed into these rooms was meant to leave no doubt about where America now stood. Today, it's open to the public. You can stand in Morgan's original study, with its soaring painted ceilings and red silk walls, and look at manuscripts that shaped history. The original handwritten score of Mozart's Hafner Symphony, notebooks belonging to Henry David Thoreau, a first edition Copernicus, sketches by Michelangelo, Bob Dylan's handwritten lyrics. All of it real, all of it here, in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. The first librarian Morgan hired, Belle de Costa Green, was a black woman who concealed her identity by passing as Portuguese, because the only way a woman of color could hold this position in 1905 was to hide who she was. She went on to shape the entire collection and is considered one of the most brilliant art historians of the 20th century. In 1904, when the New York City subway opened for the first time, the very first train departed from here. Brass chandeliers, arched Guastavino tile ceilings, skylights running the full length of the platform, filtering light down from City Hall Park above. Then in 1945, they closed it, and it's been sealed ever since. City Hall Station was designed to be the crown jewel of New York's new transit system, a cathedral underground that would announce to the world that this was a serious, civilized city. It opened on October 27, 1904, and for 41 years it served as the southern end of what is now the 6th train line. But as New York grew, the trains got longer, and this station, built on a tight curve, couldn't accommodate them. The platform was too short, the gap between the train and platform too wide. By 1945, only 600 passengers a day were using it. New Year's Eve that year was its last night of operation. The doors closed and never reopened. Here's the thing, though. You can still see it. If you ride the downtown 6 train to Brooklyn Bridge, the last stop, and stay on board as the train loops around to head back uptown, you'll get a brief, ghostly glimpse of the station through the windows. The tiles still gleam. The skylights are still there. It looks like time stopped in 1945. For a proper tour, the New York Transit Museum offers guided visits for members. Tours sell out within hours of going on sale. The station even hosted a swearing-in ceremony for a New York City mayor on New Year's Eve 2025. A station abandoned for 80 years, briefly alive again for a single night. I want to take you somewhere that is, without question, one of the most beautiful places in New York City. Rolling hills, glacial ponds, 7,000 trees, sweeping views of Manhattan, the Statue of Liberty, and New York Harbor. It's also a cemetery, and that's what keeps most people away. Their loss. Greenwood Cemetery opened in 1838 in Brooklyn, 25 years before Central Park. It was actually one of the reasons Central Park got built at all. When city officials saw crowds of New Yorkers flocking to Greenwood to picnic on the hills and stroll among the trees, they realized that people were desperate for open space, and that a public park in Manhattan was overdue. By the 1860s, Greenwood was drawing more annual visitors than Niagara Falls. The wealthy and famous competed to be buried here. Anyone who was anyone in New York wanted their name on a Greenwood monument, and the list of people buried here is extraordinary. Leonard Bernstein, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Louis Comfort Tiffany, Samuel Morse, who invented the telegraph, Boss Tweed, the most corrupt politician in New York history, the founder of FAO Schwarz, the man who brought the Statue of Liberty's flame back from Paris. The highest point in Brooklyn is here, Battle Hill, where Washington's troops made their stand during the Revolutionary War. There's a statue of Minerva at the summit, positioned so she looks directly across the harbor at the Statue of Liberty, a cemetery, a park, a battle site, and an open-air museum all in one. In 1801, a wealthy ship captain died and left his entire fortune with one instruction: use it to build a home for retired sailors. Aged, decrepit, and worn-out seamen were his exact words. What they built is now one of the most unexpected, beautiful, and almost completely unknown places in all of New York. Sailors' Snug Harbor operated for over 150 years on 83 acres on the north shore of Staten Island, a self-contained Greek revival campus where old sailors lived out their final years with gardens, concerts, and a view of the harbor. At its peak, it housed nearly 1,000 retired seamen. Today, it's a cultural center. Museums, concert halls, botanical gardens, and art galleries spread across those same landmarked buildings. Most of it is free. The crown jewel is the Chinese Scholars Garden, and this might be the most remarkable thing on this entire list. It is one of only a handful of authentic classical Chinese gardens in the United States. Built in 1999 by a team of 40 craftsmen and artists who traveled from Suzhou, China, spending 6 months on Staten Island to complete the work. Not a single nail or drop of glue was used in its construction. Only traditional mortise and tenon joinery, as per centuries-old Chinese tradition. 8 pavilions, a bamboo forest, koi-filled ponds, 15-foot rock formations, and an upper pavilion where American beer bottle shards are embedded in mosaic alongside Chinese rice bowls. A small, deliberate symbol of two cultures meeting. Tucked behind a winding bamboo path on a Staten Island hillside, it feels like stepping through a portal. If you want the best view of the Manhattan skyline in all of New York, better than the High Line, better than Brooklyn Bridge Park, better than any rooftop bar, it's from a park in Queens that most people have never heard of. Gantry Plaza. State Park sits right on the East River in Long Island City, Queens. Just one subway stop from Midtown Manhattan. And what makes it unlike anywhere else in the city are the gantries. 2 enormous industrial cranes from 1925, still standing at the water's edge, still painted black with Long Island, written in red letters across the top. These machines were built to transfer freight cars. Trains would roll in from Long Island, and the gantries would lift the entire rail car, up to 100 tons of weight, and load it onto a barge for the crossing to Manhattan. For decades, they were the mechanical backbone of New York's supply chain. By the 1970s, shipping had changed, industry had moved on, and the gantries rusted into silence. In 1998, instead of demolishing them, the city turned the site into a park. and kept the gantries as the centerpiece. Georgia O'Keeffe had painted this exact spot in 1928. The final scene of Steven Spielberg's Munich was filmed here. Countless wedding photos are taken here every weekend. Come at sunset. The Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the whole Midtown skyline reflected in the water in front of you. It's extraordinary, and you'll almost certainly have room to breathe. There is a place at the northern tip of Manhattan where you can walk through a 12th century French monastery, stand in a courtyard from a Spanish abbey, and look out over the Hudson River, all without leaving New York City. Most people don't know it exists. The Cloisters is a branch of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, built in 1938 in Fort Tryon Park in Washington Heights. But here's what makes it extraordinary. The building isn't a recreation. It is assembled from the actual stones of 5 real medieval European monasteries, dismantled in France and Spain, shipped across the Atlantic, and reassembled here, piece by piece, on a cliff above the Hudson River. The idea came from a sculptor named George Gray Barnard, who spent years buying up medieval architectural fragments from French farmers and landowners before World War I. He shipped them back to New York and opened a small museum in Washington Heights. When John D. Rockefeller Jr. heard about it, he bought the entire collection, donated 66 acres of parkland to the city, and funded the construction of the Cloisters to house it all. Rockefeller even purchased the land on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River, the Palisades, and donated it as a park, just to make sure nothing would ever be built there that would spoil the view from the Cloisters. A man who bought a riverbank on another state so the museum's windows would stay beautiful forever. Inside you'll find the unicorn tapestries, 7 enormous Flemish weavings from around 1500, depicting the hunt and capture of a unicorn, considered among the greatest textile artworks in the world. Medieval gardens planted according to 13th century herbals, a 12th century Spanish apse, reassembled stone by stone. Complete silence. There is an island 800 yards off the southern tip of Manhattan that spent 200 years as one of the most important military bases in the United States. The D-Day invasion of Normandy was planned here. Confederate prisoners were held here during the Civil War. George Washington fired cannons from here at the British fleet. Today, you can take a $5 ferry and have a picnic there. The Lenape people called it Pagank, Nut Island, for the chestnut and hickory trees that once covered it. The Dutch took it. The British took it and used it as the private residence of colonial governors, which is where the name comes from. In 1800, the young American government converted it into a military installation, and for the next 196 years, it served continuously as an Army and then Coast Guard base. The D-Day planning detail is real. The U.S. First Army had its headquarters here during World War II, and the initial planning efforts for the Normandy landings were conducted on this island. When the Coast Guard finally left in 1996, they left behind a fully intact Victorian military town. Officers' houses, barracks, parade grounds, 2 historic forts, all frozen in time. Since 2005, it's been open to the public. No cars are allowed. You can rent a bike and circle the entire island in 20 minutes. There are hammocks strung between trees with a view of the Manhattan skyline, a working art school for high school students, free summer concerts, art installations scattered across the grounds. Fort Jay and Castle Williams, both from the early 1800s, are national monuments managed by the Park Service. From the top of the hills in the park's southern section, you get a 360-degree view. Statue of Liberty, Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. It's one of the most spectacular panoramas in the city, and most New Yorkers have never seen it. There is a bookstore in Manhattan where the ceiling looks like the night sky. The walls are lined with 14,000 books from 30 countries, and the building itself was commissioned as a wedding gift by one of the richest men in America. Almost nobody knows it's there, even though it's right across the street from Central Park. Albertine occupies the Payne-Whitney Mansion at 972 Fifth Avenue, a 1906 Italian Renaissance palazzo designed by Stanford White, the same architect who designed the Washington Square Arch. The mansion was commissioned as a wedding gift from an heir to the Standard Oil fortune to his nephew. Today, it houses the cultural services of the French Embassy, and within it, this extraordinary bookshop. The store is named after a character in Marcel Proust's masterwork, and it carries over 14,000 books in French and English, making it New York's only French-language bookstore. On the second floor, beneath a hand-painted ceiling of constellations, stars, and planets, modeled after a mural in a Munich villa. Readers sit on Versailles parquet floors, surrounded by mahogany shelves and gold leaf details. The ceiling was painted in a Harlem studio, then transferred to the ceiling in sections. The wood paneling is actually stained humble wood, made to look like mahogany. The moldings are trompe-l'œil, a French term for painting that tricks the eye, painted to look like brass. Nothing in this room is quite what it seems, which feels appropriate for a bookstore named after a character famous for her elusiveness. It's free to enter. There's no obligation to buy. And the events, philosophers, novelists, mathematicians debating ideas until midnight, are open to the public. This is one of the genuinely beautiful places in New York. In the Bronx, on a wooded ridge above the Hudson River, there is a 28-acre garden where Mark Twain once built a treehouse parlor in a chestnut tree, where the young Theodore Roosevelt spent his summers recovering from asthma, and where you can sit quietly on a Tuesday afternoon with one of the most beautiful views in the entire city, Wave Hill, and almost nobody goes there. The estate was built in 1843 as a country retreat, and over the next century, it attracted an extraordinary parade of residents and guests. Theodore Roosevelt's family rented it during the summers of 1870 and 1871, when Teddy was 12 and 13 years old, a sickly asthmatic boy who spent those summers hiking through the woods and observing birds on the river. Those summers are widely believed to have planted the seed of Roosevelt's later conservation legacy, over 230 million acres of protected American land. Mark Twain leased the property from 1901 to 1903 and loved it extravagantly. Of the winter winds here, he wrote that he had never experienced anything like them, and that they thrilled him and uplifted him in a way that made him want to live forever. He set up a parlor in the branches of a chestnut tree on the lawn. Arturo Toscanini, the most famous conductor of the 20th century, lived here from 1942 to 1945. In 1960, the family that owned Wave Hill donated the entire estate to New York City. Today, it's a public garden with an alpine rock garden, woodland trails, perennial borders, and a greenhouse full of exotic plants. The views across the Hudson to the New Jersey Palisades are some of the most serene in the city. There is something about Wave Hill that is genuinely restorative in a way that Central Park, as magnificent as it is, often isn't, because it's quieter, smaller, less visited, and somehow more intimate. When the bedrock here was measured, geologists found it dated back over 1 billion years. You are standing on the oldest rock in New York, 10 places, all in New York, almost none of them on a tourist map. What I love about this city is that it keeps revealing itself. You can live here your whole life and still turn a corner and find something that stops you in your tracks. A garden, a ceiling, a view, a room where history happened and was somehow never cleaned up. If you make it to any of these places, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me which one surprised you the most. And if you want more New York like this, the hidden, the underrated, the places worth the extra subway stop, subscribe. We're just getting started.